everybody, and welcome to yet another edition of ENM-এর and we have today a very senior diplomat from the beautiful country as well as the continent of Australia, a country in the news, and of course the whole world is in the news at this moment. So we welcome Mr. Andrew Ford.
Thank you very much.
Australia and Kolkata.
Well, welcome to the consulate.
Thanks a lot. And it's a beautifully done up office and a beautifully done up consulate here in Kolkata.
Yeah, no, we're very pleased with this. We've been here for 1 year in Kolkata, but now we've only just moved into our new office here, and here we are able to conduct an interview in the conference room.
Great. Welcome to India. Welcome to Kolkata.
Thank you very much.
Australia has always been one of our very, very favorite, be it cricket, be it football, be it soccer, be it whatever. Because, I don't know, for some reason India-Australia has a very native connect.
Yes.
Absolutely. So, now you had the bushfire, then you have the corona. So, what actually is happening? What really is happening?
Well, as you said, we've had bushfire and corona. There's no link between those two things, but I think it's a challenging time for all of us in the world at the moment. I mean, yes, it was a challenging time in Australia during the bushfires. We do have fires almost every summer in Australia, but these fires were more widespread than we were used to, and it was more challenging for us. And large parts of the Australian bushland were impacted by the fires, which of course had a major impact on, people's lives were lost, homes were destroyed, but also had a major impact on tourism and the economy. And now, of course, with the global situation with coronavirus or COVID-19, we are in a situation where it's like a further blow, I guess, to some of these industries and some people in Australia. It is a challenging time, but Australians, like Indian people, we're very resilient and resourceful, and I'm sure that we will come through this time. Certainly, after the bushfires, we're in a rebuilding phase, and many of the towns that were affected were slowly getting back on their feet. Certainly, we'd moved past the dangers, the response phase into the rebuilding phase. But I think now, with this added challenges around COVID-19, people are needing to sort of, there's a whole different approach that's required now.
Which part of Australia do you come from?
So I grew up in Melbourne, which is in, I think you would know, the state of Victoria, and the home of the Melbourne Cricket Ground, where I've spent many a happy day. When I finished my university in Melbourne, I moved to Canberra, which is the capital, and I joined the federal government there. So my home has been in Canberra ever since then. But of course, as a diplomat, I've also had the joy and experience of living in a number of different countries overseas as well. So not just in Australia, not just in Canberra, but also overseas.
What's the situation in Melbourne at the moment? Is MCG, is cricket still on in MCG? Are you playing, or is it in the lockdown stage?
So we're out of the Australian cricket season now. We play our cricket in the Southern Hemisphere summer, so our cricket season was just finishing at the moment, and we're about to move to our winter sports. So the MCG is very famous for Australian rules football. AFL, as it might be known in some parts of the world. And so that season was due to start this Thursday, but there's some decisions that are currently being made as a result of the coronavirus situation about whether that season will start on time this week or not. So the MCG, unfortunately, of course, as in many situations, if the sport does get underway, it will be to an empty stadium. And you can imagine, in a stadium the size of the MCG with 100,000 people, will hold 100,000 people. With only a small number there, it will seem very empty. But I think these are unusual times, and
absolutely. Yeah. In Melbourne, how are people waking up to this corona? How are they kind of shielding themselves?
So we've got an Australia-wide approach at the moment, and like many countries, it involves a number of different things. The first Well, first of all, I guess it starts with the individual, with personal hygiene. We've all been told the importance of washing our hands, and also we're now increasingly moving to what we call social distancing. So I think, sitting about as far apart as we all are now is what we're all required to do, so that we are. So the stage that Australia is at the moment is that we've had more than 350 cases across the country, and around 5 deaths at the last count that I heard. And so it's very important. These coming weeks are very important to try and stop the spread of the illness. So people are being asked that if they have returned from overseas in the last 2 weeks, or if they've come in contact with someone who is a known positive case of COVID-19, that they should self-isolate at home for 2 weeks. So many people in Australia are doing that, practicing self-isolation, which means staying in their homes or hotels. Similar to India, we've also increased restrictions on our travel. So we've now urged all Australians to reconsider their need for travel to anywhere in the world. And we're also asking that anyone arriving from overseas, they need to self-quarantine for 14 days before going to the community. So these measures are aimed at slowing the spread of COVID-19. And I guess, we all know the reasons behind that. First of all, we want to avoid the more vulnerable members of society being affected by this illness and facing serious illness or even the possibility of death. But also, we want to try and reduce the stress and strain on our hospitals and our medical staff, because if there's a large spike in people having to go for hospital treatment, that's going to put a lot of pressure. So I think this is why all countries are now looking to adopt measures such as these. Indian government is also adopting measures similar nature to this.
You've restricted entry into restaurants and pubs and schools and colleges. All these measures are also
slightly different at this stage, but these measures are all being reviewed on a almost daily basis at the moment. But the most recent set of measures announced in Australia were restrictions on larger public gatherings of over 500 people, encouraging people to work from home if they could, and those sort of measures. But we haven't yet moved to the steps in Delhi where shopping centres and restaurants are being closed. But I'm sure those measures would be being considered at least at this time.
In Australia, is it spread all over the country, or is it restricted to a particular place?
No, it has spread all over the country, and I think one of the things is Australians, like Indians, are travellers, and so many people have travelled, and now we're also getting cross-community infection as well. So each state and territory of Australia has now been impacted. I guess there's some rural areas that haven't been impacted yet, but certainly the major centres have been impacted.
Is it going to hit the travel, the economy and the tourism industry very hard in Australia? Because you are promoting Tourism Australia in a big way, and a whole lot of travellers and tourists were going towards Australia. Australia is a very favourite destination for tourists. So this is going to impact your...
It is going to impact the tourism sector in Australia and in other countries. And as I mentioned earlier about the bushfires, it's for some tourism operators it will be a double blow, because people who may not have been able to get to some areas because they were affected by bushfires, now there's this additional impact. Of course, Australians can still travel within Australia at the moment. That may change, I guess. But there is no doubt that globally, not just in Australia, this will impact on the tourism sector, the services sector, restaurants, and hotels and things like that. And I think we're already seeing that impact.
And how do you see the economy? And the global economy has taken a hit.
Yes.
So what is the status of economy, not only from an Australian point of view, from a global point of view? How do you look at the economy? How long do you think it will take to bounce back?
These are questions that I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't know how long it's going to take. I think it really will depend on how soon we can, as a globe, not just as individual countries, can get the virus back into check and can start easing some of these restrictions. But at the moment, I think the whole focus needs to be on public health and safety, and this will involve some restrictions that will have economic impacts. There's no doubt they already are having economic impacts, and so but only time will tell what the nature of those impacts will be. But there is no doubt, I'm sure, that there will be impacts.
This is an absolute unknown commodity, this virus,
Yes.
and so far as we understand, there are no vaccines, nothing has been invented, or people have talks around like Israel has invented something, they talk about it, China has come up with something, and they are offering other countries some kind of, you know, their experiences.
Yes.
So is Australia like taking help from other countries, or is there any kind of vaccine, any kind of preventive care?
You mean first of all, in developing a vaccine, yes, we do not have a vaccine globally, and there would be. I'm aware that there are researchers in Australia who would be working, I'm sure, in cooperation with colleagues across the world to try and come up with a vaccine. This is not something that each country would need to be preparing in isolation. It's important that we together come up with something to address this. So Australia has some very good scientific researchers, and I know that there are people in various research institutes working on trying to develop this vaccine. And certainly we can benefit from the unfortunate experience that China and now some of the other countries are having with the virus. There are now some results that are coming through that are providing some early, information for researchers to try and develop a response, both in terms of vaccine, but also in terms of how to try and prevent this virus spreading. So this is why some of the measures that our countries are adopting are based on experience of seeing how the virus is unfolding.
Right. So a lot of Indian students study in Australia,
yes,
and many of them are still there in Australia. So what's your advice to them? What's your advice to the parents in India, and parents in Kolkata in particular, parents in West Bengal in particular, whose children are studying in Australia at home?
Well, I know that yes, you're right. This has been one of the exciting trends in the Australian-India relationship in the last recent years. Has been the increasing number of Indian students studying in Australia, and they're now the second largest international cohort, 115,000 Indian students studying in Australia, which I think is fantastic, and that number has been growing. So what I would say is for parents of Indian students who are now in Australia is to not worry about their children. Of course, it would be natural to worry about your children, but I know many of the universities are now beginning to move towards online classes, and so I'm sure the students will be taken care of through their university courses. They will continue to study. I think in terms of coming back, of course, that's always up individual choice that people need to make based on the travel restrictions that are in place in both countries and in terms of their study. There's no provision for students to work online in India on an Australian course at the moment. I think that requires some agreements that haven't yet been reached, but we certainly it would be an individual choice if students wanted to come back to their home country.
So for the moment they are safe in Australia, as they're well taken care of and absolutely quarantined if they have contacted corona, or else they are absolutely fit and fine in Australia. No need to worry for the parents.
I think the main thing to think about from the parents' point of view is that at the moment the advice from health authorities is it's better to try and minimise international travel unless it's essential. So if these are students who are studying in Australia, who have enrolled in a course, I think they need to try and work with the local situation, whether those courses are now being most likely taught online in many cases, that they will that they move to that approach rather than returning home unless unnecessarily. Of course, it's an individual choice for what students want to do, but at the moment, essential travel is the only, and I think the definition of essential is quite narrow, really.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, we have had a lot of queries coming in from basically tour operators, and my colleague Manisha Mondul has been handling the tourism sector, stating that when with these visa regulations will ease up, and when the tourism, because tourism Australia, as I mentioned, was very popular this thing. So she has a couple of questions about this tourism aspect.
So I mean, how badly it is hit by this epidemic?
By the epidemic? Well, it's I think what's been impacted is, as I was saying, is that it's now when tourists travel to Australia, they need to self-quarantine for 2 weeks. So I can just give you a personal example. I was actually planning a return to Australia for a holiday to catch up with family next month, but it's now less attractive to do so because I would go to Australia and have to stay in one location, in one room or house for 2 weeks, and so I've decided to postpone my travel. And I'm sure many people will be making similar sorts of decisions at this time, just because for public health and safety, as I say, that it's more important to be concerned about public health and safety at this stage than travel.
Business sector, for business sector, it is going towards isolation. So what are the main sectors which is right now hit by this thing?
I think I mentioned earlier, I think that the main sectors will be in the services sector, because in services is where is tourism, it's hospitality, it's restaurants and those sort of things. So because people are now either choosing to stay away, or in some cases there are restrictions on those places operating, this is going to naturally, I'm talking globally here, not necessarily just Australia, this is where it's going to have the greatest impact in the services sector. So that I think we're all grappling, our governments are all grappling with how they deal with this sort of issue, and whether employers can be flexible. Some people in these sectors are working on maybe casual employment arrangements, so this might make it more difficult. So there's definitely challenges for governments dealing with these sectors.
And what is the scenario for India-Australia business? I mean, your zone, which is Eastern India and Australia.
So I think if you want to look at looking at that from a bigger picture, rather than just focusing purely on coronavirus, I think that it's a very good prospect. The India relationship, Australia relationship is really at a peak in many ways. Our trade has been growing at 15% a year for the last 5 years. India is now Australia's 5th largest trading partner. India is our fastest growing tourism market, with around 400,000 Indian tourists visiting Australia last year.
Every year.
And that's growing. That's last year. I mean, on projections, it was projected to grow. Of course, the latest coronavirus will have an impact on those numbers, I expect. But so the relationship is going very strongly, and this is one of the reasons why we set up a post here in Kolkata, because Australia has had a mission in Delhi, of course, since independence. We have consulates in Mumbai and Chennai, but we hadn't had anything in the east and northeast of India for 40 years now, and so we felt that because of the importance of India to Australia, it was time to set up a consulate here. This also reflected a study that Australia did a couple of years ago. It was an independent study commissioned by the government, done by a former very senior diplomat, and it found that there was no market more important economically to Australia in the next 15 years than India. So that's and as part of that finding, it gave a strategy for how we in Australia need to approach the Indian market. And that strategy is based around 10 key states and 10 key sectors. And so we are now encouraging Australian companies, when they look to India, to think about India as not just one big massive country of 1.3 billion people, but also as a group of states that often have very different characteristics to each other, different languages, different ways of operating. And so to try and help people to not be sort of daunted by this massive market, but to also see the opportunities that come from focusing down. So the government has a very firm strategy on how we're approaching India, as economically, but also strategically, and setting up here in Kolkata was a very important part of that.
So how you're trying to, are you planning to overcome this situation later on through business or the travel sector?
Well, you mean overcome the corona? I think coronavirus you need to look at as primarily at this stage a health and safety, health and welfare issue, but of course with economic impacts. But I'm looking from a longer term perspective at what the opportunities that India holds for Australia, and I think those opportunities will remain beyond the current crisis that we're dealing with. And I think we need to have that long-term perspective, and that's why this study looked out to the year 2035. So often in government circles we tend not to look at beyond about 3 to 5 years in our planning, but this is quite ambitious, looking out to the next 15 to 20 years at what India has to offer. So, and I think if we look at it from that perspective, the India-Australia relationship is strong and has the potential to be even stronger.
So I'll just...
Thank you, Manisha. Another very interesting aspect which is cropping up in my mind is when can you have India-Australia match at MCG or the Eden Gardens?
When? Yes, well, I don't think there's been any change to the schedules at the moment, but of course we would all love to see that. We would all love to see that, but again, we have to put the health, the current crisis. We have to get through that.
Yes, absolutely. And do you recommend the Great Barrier Reef? I mean that area. I mean people are very absolutely they go bonkers about Great Barrier Reef.
Yes.
That is something very popular among tourists here in this part of the world.
Yes.
So that area is not affected, I suppose. I mean, from what we have heard.
From the bushfires, certainly not.
And from corona.
And well, I don't know that the reef itself could be affected by coronavirus, as you know.
But the area surrounding that.
Oh, you mean tourist-wise? Yeah, I'm not aware of many cases in that part of Queensland, but yeah.
Queensland is largely being unaffected. That's what we've heard.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah. Well, I think Queensland. I haven't looked at the breakdown by state for a couple of days, but as I say though, you know the travel restrictions apply to the whole of Australia at the moment.
Absolutely. So when do you expect this restriction to? I mean, how long? I mean, in your perspective,
well, I think again, it's you're asking the impossible question that we'd all love an answer to. Currently, the restrictions are for a month until mid-April, but I'm sure they will be reviewed as we get close to that date. So, and I think India's current restrictions are also around mid-April as well, but and that's based on some experience in some countries where we're reaching quite a critical stage in terms of the number of cases in the country and trying to stop that exponential growth.
So your new cases have come down at the moment in Australia?
No, there was quite they are still increasing over the last few days. So we haven't yet. The curve is still going up.
Okay. So we all hope that things will rationalize, stabilize as quickly as possible, because it's something somewhere that we are not really prepared for. Nobody in the world was prepared for. No. And we are all moving in a very smooth direction everywhere, all around, and suddenly something hit us. Yeah. But then India-Australia relationship is definitely going to go on strength to strength, and will go forward. And we'll once again watch an India-Australia match in Gardens, and then
that'd be great. I'd love to sit and watch the game.
Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
And sharing a lot of things about Australia. And basically, what is more reassuring is the fact that students who are there, because we've got a lot of calls from the parents, students whose children are studying in Australia. It's very reassuring to know that they are all safe, and the Australian government has put in all measures to take care of them at this point?
I think it's important that, like all people in Australia at the moment, they just continue to follow the advice of local authorities, and if they continue to do that, that will help protect them from the virus.
And any people who have gone to work there, anybody stuck there, according to your information, anybody stuck in Australia at the moment, anybody from India who's gone to work?
I haven't heard, but I'm sure there are people who may want to leave and come back to India, like there would be some Australian people in India at the moment who might want to try and get back. And I guess if they do, they just need to follow the travel restrictions that are in place.
The health advisory
And there's nothing actually, there's nothing prohibiting people travelling between our two countries. They just need to, in the case of when they arrive in Australia, self-quarantining. And I think in India there's also some restrictions that are in place for people arriving here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you very much
Good
for
to
being
see
with
you.
us. And that was Mr. Andy Ford, and that was very, very reassuring thoughts that he shared with us, and also about the perspective, the things in Australia at the moment, vis-a-vis the whole world and also in India. Abhijit Nandamilindo and Manisha Mondol for ENM News from the Australian Consulate in Kolkata. So keep watching ENM News and keep watching ENM Adda. Will be back next week with another version of ENM Adda. Thank you.